Okay, let's start with Anwar. Anwar, we'll start with your aperture images and we'll check out this one here where you've shot at f8. What cute ducklings. Okay, so f8 showing a pretty shallow depth of field here. And this next one is still at f8, but you changed the point of focus. So the depth of field actually stayed the same, and we can see the background is still out of focus. The foreground is out of focus now because actually you changed where you were focusing, and at the moment that's kind of not really anywhere. So you're welcome to go ahead and redo this part of the assignment if you'd like to. But very cute ducklings. All right. So distance from subject, it looks as if actually these are for the change in the focal length of the lens images, because that at least is what's recorded as having changed here. So here the focal length of the lens is set at 39 millimeters. We've come in pretty close with the lens. Beautiful, beautiful colors here. And obviously pretty shallow depth of field. And then in the next image with a wider angle lens at 18 millimeters, the depth of field obviously is much greater. Okay, so good job on those. And then the change here actually in the distance. So we'll start with the one that's further back, but you're actually still pretty close, I think, but the depth of field at f8 is relatively great. But then when you come in close, obviously the depth of field changes considerably. And it's almost like a mishmash of information. It's hard to tell what we're looking at. Okay, so good job. And if you want to redo the aperture images, that's great. Okay, thanks, Anwar. Next up is Alex. We have two Alexes, so this is Alex Olonier. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Okay, so first up, your aperture images. And it looks as if you did not change the aperture in these images, so they're both shot at f5.2, but what you changed was the point of focus, where you focused in the frame. So why don't you go ahead and reread the assignment, the section on depth of field and the assignment, and you're welcome to reshoot this portion of the, or any portion of the assignment. Okay. So distance from subject here. And this image looks beautiful. At f4.5, the focal length of the lens set at 14.8, so about 15 millimeters, quite wide angle. This image, though you did change the distance, though not by very much, but you also changed the point of focus, so what you're focusing on. So none of the frame is in focus. So what I'd like you to do is, if you're going to reshoot this, move further back from the subject and then move in closer. So there's more of a difference in the distance, but remember to check your focus and make sure that that the frame is in focus for each shot. Okay, and let's look at the focal length images. And in this case, actually, you did change the aperture slightly. This image here at f8 and the next one at f5.7. And between f8 and 5.7, you won't see a huge change in the depth of field. And we don't see that much here. What has changed also is that the focal length has changed a little bit, from 195 roughly to 180. But what really changed is your point of focus. So in the image on the right, we'll look at that one first, the point of focus is the tree, the needles of the tree. And in this image, those are out of focus. And the background, while not exactly in focus, is in sharper, it's sharper than the foreground. So that's how I can tell that you changed what you were focusing on. So for each of the each set, I want you to focus on the same subject, changing just the depth of field. So for the focal length of the lens, I see that you are using a Panasonic camera, and that should give you a fairly, I think we saw here in the aperture images, you can pull the lens way back and have wide angle of view with the shorter portion of the lens, and then the telephoto view with the longer portion of the lens. So I'd like you to use the extremes for the focal length portion of this assignment. Use the widest angle of view possible that your lens has, and then extend all the way out to the most telephoto to show the shallow depth of field. Okay, so you're welcome to redo the assignment if you'd like to. All right, thanks, Alex. Okay, Aaron Bean, hello. Let's look at your aperture images. And this one at f22 at 55 millimeters. This at f5.6 at 55 millimeters. Looks as if you changed the distance, however, as well. So there's quite a change in the depth of field just because you have changed the aperture from f22 to f5.6, which is pretty much the extremes of the lens. But it looks as if you also came in closer for this f5.6 image. So I want you to stay in the same place using the same focal length of lens, which you did, but again, I'd like you to stay in the same place so we see an exact comparison of the depths of field. Okay. Here are your distance from subject images, and they're really beautiful. The colors are just really neat, but because the background is so dark, there's just no way to tell what the depth of field is at all. What is in the background. It's just impossible to tell. So you're welcome to reshoot and resubmit the assignment. And in fact, I hope you will anyway, because you're missing the focal length of the lens portion of the assignment. So yeah, please get them in if possible. Thanks. Kate Baumer, all right, here are your aperture images. You did a beautiful job on this assignment. Here we have the shallow depth of field at f4.8 and great depth of field at f32, so huge difference. I find it so interesting, the composition is the same, the image is the same, and yet the depth of field makes it a completely different image, right? The rows here, the not quite open rows, isolated from the background beautifully by the shallow depth of field, and here it's not that it's a bad image, it's just different, and there's so much more information available to us in this second image. Okay, so your distance from subject, both shot roughly at f8. The focal length did change, so that's something we should look at here. So I think what happened here is that you just mixed up the labeling. Okay, so here we'll go with focal length of lens. So this image made with the focal length at 70 and this at 48, and there's a huge difference in the depth of field, and of course in the frame, in what the image is. So this, of course, with the wider it's not a wide angle lens, a normal lens, but the wider angle of view gives us an idea of where we are, as well as what we're looking at. And then, of course, the image made with the longer, more telephoto lens isolates this this specific area. And I love that you isolated the faded rose rather than the the full in bloom roses. And very lovely use of light as well. Okay, focal length of, so this becomes the distance. So this image here, further back, obviously, and then coming in close with the depth of field definitely becoming shallower. Okay, nicely done. Great job, Kate. Thank you. Okay, Will Brooks, great job on these. So here we have your aperture images, f2.8 and f11. There's a certain humorous aspect, I think, to these, but definitely a change in the depth of field from shallow here to great depth of field with f11. Okay, very nice. Distance. So f11 at 8.8 millimeters, a pretty wide angle lens. And yeah, even at f11, which would normally give moderately great depth of field, when you come in close, the depth of field definitely is shallower than when you back up. Okay. And focal length of lens. This first one with the focal length at 16.792, so 17 millimeters. And the depth of field is pretty great. I like your arrangement of elements, and I think it works even better here with the shallower depth of field. So here the focal length is 36 millimeters, which still is in the normal range, but you're getting this wonderful compression of space from the foreground to the background, so we don't have as much of a sense of how much space there is going back in the frame. And the combination of these elements, I think, works really beautifully with the ship in the foreground and the globe, and then the old style telephone, and it looks like the British, the Union Jack back there as well. So really nice job, Will. Thank you. Dominique. Okay, Dominique, I would like you to have put the images in separate folders so that it would be easier to tell which are which. That said, let's get started. So it looks as if this first set has a change in the focal length of the lens. So here the focal length is 42 millimeters. And in the second, it is 14. And obviously, we're getting a much wider angle of view here with a lot more information. And in this image, coming in closer via the lens, the information is cropped. And actually, it's a much tighter, I think, composition. I think it works really nicely. However, it's difficult to see a change in the depth of field, and that's mostly because everything is a little further away. So you really, in order to see a change in depth of field, something has to be somewhat closer to the lens. And if everything is kind of beyond 20 feet or so, you're just not going to see that much of a change in the depth of field. I think the image works very nicely in terms of composition, however. Now let's look at the next set. And so here we have a change in the distance from the subject. Further back here at f6.3 and 14 millimeters, and f6.3 at 14 millimeters at 1 foot. And let's see if we come in close. we can certainly see a change in the depth of field from the foreground to the background, not even that much, that far back. So nice isolation of this area here in the foreground. Oak galls, maybe? Anyway, very, very lovely. And this image, it's just more diffuse, it's actually hard to tell where we're supposed to look. And so coming in closer in this image really kind of fine tunes what you saw and what you're showing us. Okay, and finally changing the aperture. So f22 and f4. And there's certainly a change in the depth of field. So at f22, we'll come in closer here, and yeah, the foreground and the background are both definitely really pretty sharp. Whereas here with the aperture at f4, the focus falls off actually very beautifully. It doesn't fall off immediately, but it kind of gradually goes off. Okay. Good job overall. Thank you. If you want to redo the first step, that's up to you. But overall, you've done a nice job, Dominique. All right. Enrique. Okay. Enrique, I would like you to have used a different subject for each section. Though you did move the figurine a bit for each one. But anyway, aperture. Okay, so here we have the religious figurine at f22 and here at f3.5. And we can certainly see a change in the depth of field. Kind of interesting to go back and forth, right? The information around the figurine is kind of distracting, I find. Although, in a way, it's interesting to have the figurine sort of presiding over all of this stuff. But I think that the shallower depth of field at f3.5 works nicely to isolate the figurine from some of the I don't want to say clutter, but just some of the information that sort of distracts from the subject. Okay. Distance from subject. And yes, there is certainly a change in the depth of field. Although at f4.5, you're going to have relatively shallow depth of field anyway, but okay. And focal length of the lens, so 55 millimeters here and 18 millimeters in this case. And certainly there's a very noticeable change in the depth of field, even though 55 millimeters is in the normal range. It's not telephoto, but you're relatively close to the subject anyway, and the aperture is relatively, it's not tiny, I mean, it's not enormous, but it's on the larger side, which gives greater, shallower depth of field, pardon me. And here at 18 millimeters, I think we're getting that same sort of effect of presiding over what is here, with the clothes and in the background and the box and so on. And the depth of field, again, greater here. Okay, very nice job, Enrique. Thank you.